The ghost of Brett Kavanaugh and the reality of karma. Today we're going to get into the Wayback Machine again, and then learn about how the three Stooges of Virginia government are doing, and of course, we will check up on creepy Uncle Joe and his supporters too. The New York Times headline, The Strange Aftermath of Virginia's Cascade of Political Scandals. Hello, and welcome to the Tea Party Hardy channel, where the party is just getting started. Current events looked at through a skeptical eye using science, history, and sometimes humor to explore the events of the day. Let's get down to business. All right, let's get into the Wayback Machine. Joe Biden has been in the news plenty in the past few days because a failed Democrat candidate from Nevada decided that an event from several years ago all of a sudden bothered her enough to write and get published an article about Joe Biden's being Joe Biden. Or at least that's how Democrats are now defending Biden's actions, of his habitual fondling and sniffing of women's and girls' hair in public, as well as having regular hands-on moments with women he is meeting, far more aggressively than what was reported and got the president of Pixar removed from his job, where he was just a serial hugger. So yes, that Joe Biden. Well, back in the earliest part of the 1990s, he was a senator, and he was the leader of the Senate panel that was in charge of investigating the claims of a woman named Anita Hill that she had made about Supreme Court hopeful Clarence Thomas. What came out of those hearings and investigation was a lot of mudslinging and character assassinations, and has become the foundation for the story of how conservatives going before the Senate for examination are treated, with plenty of charges and tiny amounts of evidence. Thus, Anita Hill enraged lefties and righties alike for opposite reasons. She fired up the left with claims of sexual harassment that at the time were new concepts to the legal world, but would soon engulf both politics and corporate law from that day on. Again, she did this with little to no proof, which sounds familiar now, but again, in those days, such a thing was novel and pioneer. She fired up the right because of that very idea that she had plenty to say and nothing to show. Were we to start eliminating people's lifelong reputations and future prospects of work and career based strictly on hearsay? According to the rules created by those hearings, the answer from the left was a clear and loud yes! And it is a well they can't help themselves from going back to as often as they can. A few years later, the law books were filled with rules and statutes about personal conduct between the sexes, which in those days meant men and women, as there were only two in those days. But of course, the well that the left goes to for nourishment for their side often contains a side effect. All water creates a reflection when the light is just right, and the left had celebrated a young partier who played saxophone on TV and bragged about the type of underwear he wore. But like many young male partiers, his idea of partying included womanizing. His reputation of having his way with women was well known in his state, and he had even been accused of having a relationship with a woman who was not his wife, and she having the audio tapes to prove it. And later, we would learn, he was accused of beating some women and raping another. But since the mainstream media was calling him the new Camelot, which again turned out to be more accurate than most Americans had any idea at the time, they covered for Bill Clinton on all corners. They didn't care about the audio tapes from Jennifer Flowers, showing who Bill Clinton truly was. They cared about the new president being a supporter of women's rights, the euphemism for abortion. So, Ms. Flowers had to go to the nascent right-wing media, which in those days was a few print publications and the newly forming political talk radio shows on AM radio. Then came Paula Jones, who had reported that Bill Clinton had roughed her up when she didn't want to have relations with him. All of this was after Anita Hill, where Democrats had taken the firm stand to be in support of women, no matter what, except all of those women who spoke about their run-ins with Bill Clinton found out that no matter what meant no matter what if you're attacking a Republican. So the left did what they do. And they didn't eat crow because the media won't make the left eat crow. And they instead turned the tables on the women and wrote stories about how awful they were. And that if you drag a dollar bill through a trailer park, you never know what you will find. And more stories like that. Then, of course, came Bill Clinton's reckoning with the blue dress wearing Monica Lewinsky, the barely legal-aged White House intern. Bill Clinton broke nearly every rule that was in the book, regardless of how wet the ink was on those rules and laws, so that he could have his way with her. And again, the left threw away all their so-called principles to stand with him. And since we won't pretend that the media has principles to throw away, we'll just state they continued to protect and side with their leftist president. End the Wayback Machine ride. A few months ago, Brett Kavanaugh was given the Clarence Thomas treatment before the Senate. But with modern mob antics added to the mix, women dressing like TV characters forcing their way into the hearing specifically to disrupt them, mobs outside the Capitol building screaming, women going into the balcony of Congress and shouting down, and many more different types of protest against Kavanaugh's appointment. Because unlike Bill Clinton, Kavanaugh is under the impression that inside of a mother's womb is a baby developing during the gestation period, not a mass of tissue, not a health care issue that's fate is to be determined by the mother and an unnamed doctor. Here again, the left and Democrats lowered the bar on evidence to point where senators and congresspeople were both saying that evidence was no longer necessary. The senator from Hawaii was as clear as she could be when she said, "Not only do women like Dr. Ford, who bravely come forward, need to be heard, but they need to be believed," she insisted. She added, "I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up and step up and do the right thing for a change." Due process? Who needs it? Kamala Harris? She said they don't need it. Blumenthal? He said they don't need it. Due process is for a court, not for the rest of society, even though the whole foundation of American society is based on due process. Yes, you can have an opinion of who's guilty and who's not guilty, but we've always held in all of our public domain the concept of due process. Even though we may think someone is guilty, we still allow for the fact that there still needs to be a trial to find out if our opinion is backed up by the facts. And that was completely dismissed during Kavanaugh and trumpeted by everybody on the left. I don't know, maybe that's an overstatement. If there were people on the left that weren't throwing away due process, they didn't get any attention from the microphone or the cameras. I'll put it like that. So it turned out, once again, all of this sound and fury signified nothing being yelled by idiots. Kavanaugh was put on the bench for the Supreme Court, but this time around, it was a close call that only happened because the right didn't buckle to the accusations backed up by nothing. And to the contrary this time around, all of the data pointed as far away from the accusations as can be imagined. But had the right caved, the end of our government would have begun at that moment where due process and evidence was surrendered by the left to get more power. Then, flash forward a few weeks, and we go to our topic at hand. The Virginia governor, lieutenant governor, and the third in line. They were about to do what Bill Clinton did before them. Make the party put up or shut up, as they apparently say in Hawaii. With two officials wearing blackface as far back as 30 years ago, obviously far further back than Billy Crystal, Jimmy Kimmel, and Ted Danson's public and televised wearings of blackface. They were never touted as people to have their careers over. And then, there was the curious case of the lieutenant governor, whose name is Fairfax, which is funny because he's from Virginia, and there's a city named Fairfax, Virginia. It's just, yeah, he's hard to Google. Lieutenant governor, who was accused by two women of the same or higher stature than Balsey-Ford was, who went after Kavanaugh for forcing them into adult relationships against their will. And just like in our Wayback Machine, what has happened to those on the left who broke the rules they wrote to stop things like this from happening? Well, let's revisit that New York Times headline, shall we? the strange aftermath of Virginia's cascade of political scandals. Here's what the New York Times said. House Democrats, who as a group in February said they were no longer confident in the governor's representation of Virginians after learning of a shocking racist photo on Mr. Northam's medical school yearbook page. Yeah, that was then. Now he's on a stage, and on his left were mostly Republicans, including the Speaker of the House, who declared that Mr. Northam's ability to lead and govern is permanently impaired. And some on the stage were members of the Legislative Black Caucus, which called the yearbook photo disgusting, reprehensible, and offensive, and a complete betrayal. This is, still quoting the New York Times, this is the strange, suspended state of Virginia politics, just 2 months after the scandal seemed to be devouring the state's government from the top down. Really, it's strange. I wonder why it's strange. In the space of a week, in early February, the public was stunned by revelations about each of the 3 highest statewide elected officials, all Democrats, the racist photo in the governor's yearbook, accusations of physical assault, I can't say the other word, YouTube comes after you, sorry, against the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general's appearance in blackface at a party in college. Protesters and news crews swarmed to the State House. Calls for resignations came from fellow Virginia Democrats, Republicans, and even 2020 presidential candidates. And then it just went poof, said Natalie Draper, a librarian sitting in the back of a coffee house last week in Richmond. It's like it never happened. Virginians have various theories as to how this surreal normalcy set in. Well, I'm not from Virginia, but I'll tell you my theory. My theory is y'all stopped covering it. Y'all stopped going down there and saying, what's up with that? Why are you letting these people remain in power? That's why it went poof, because it goes poof when y'all stop talking about it. It's not complicated. You got Rachel Maddow going on for 2 years plus about Russiagate when there's no such thing as Russiagate. And when the verdict comes down, she's like, blah, 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 I don't care. And yet there she is, still talking about it. So it's still a thing. Now, she doesn't have much of an audience anymore. That's her fault. But the point is, there was not ever any evidence towards the Russiagate to begin with. Oh, there was the dossier. Yeah, but the dossier was paid for by an opponent. And if that, again, who makes these rules for campaigning and not campaigning, and who breaks them? Such a consistent pattern. And of course, we also have Joe Biden getting a pass for doing far more than what Kavanaugh was accused of, because while Ford's claims began as being groped over her clothes for an unknown and never asked amount of time, somehow that was amplified by the media into attempted rape, though Ford never said anything happened beyond the groping above her clothes, while Joe Biden's gropes of hair, arms, hips, his kisses to hair, to faces, to lips, and that's just from the clips found on YouTube. What about all those things? Yeah. So, do Democrats stand for all women and believe all women this time? Pardon me borrowing this. Don't be ridiculous. Of course they don't, when the men have a D before their name instead of an R. And remember this little lesson about those letters. Remember that the D next to somebody's name stands for does not apply to me. And the R stands for responsible for all that is evil in the world. If you can remember that, then you can see why every mainstream media headline and story reads the way they do. If they got the D, doesn't apply to me. I don't have to follow those rules. In fact, I took a sledgehammer to my smartphone so that you couldn't look at them. Yes, an actual sledgehammer to an actual smartphone. I used bleach bit to wipe them off because remember, it's just yoga and wedding plans. Oh, no, I know there's many a rule and many a law that says you can't have a server in your home when you're doing government business. I have a D by my name. The rules don't apply to me. In California, you're only allowed to be governor for 2 terms because they have term limits. Yet Governor Brown was governor for 4 terms because he has a D by his name. The rules don't apply. And the R? Oh, George Bush was responsible for all the evil that happened in the 8 years of President Obama's term. Ask him. He said it countless times. Thanks for checking in. We hope you enjoyed the content and you got something out of it that was useful. And if you'd like to share the video, we would be very grateful for the support of the channel. So we're going to bring you content that you're not going to hear anywhere else. We can almost guarantee you, though we know there's millions of hours of information on YouTube and podcasts and everything else out there, but we feel pretty confident in saying the angle that we bring to the story is one you're not going to hear anywhere else. So that if you like that angle and it's helping you, we do encourage you to subscribe and to check in and stay with us. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you in the future.